But you remember back in 2022 when 6 women working together but claiming to be independent won formerly safe Liberal seats, calling themselves the Teals. Now, of course, teal is, Liberal blue with just a tinge of green because we're worried about the climate. Well, by now everybody knows that the Teals are absolute greens all the way through. In fact, they're greens in all but name. Recent analysis published today in the Daily Telegraph shows the Teals voted so often with the Greens as to be barely indistinguishable. Have a look at these voting patterns. Monique Ryan, for instance, from Kooyong, she voted 77% of the time in alignment with the Greens. Or what about Zali Steggall from Warringah? 75% of the time that she voted, she was aligned with the Greens party. But Zoe Daniel and Sophie Scamps, well, it was 81% of the time for them. And the winner, coming in at 94%, is North Sydney MP Kylie Tink. Now, Kylie Tink did amuse me when confronted with these voting patterns. She said, on 100% of occasions, now remember, 94% of the time she voted with the Greens, but on 100% of occasions, I've voted in a way that is consistent with my community's expectations and ambitions, which makes you wonder, why didn't her community just elect a Green? I suspect they did. Actually, just on that, she's voted 94% of the time with the Greens. You want to know what percentage of votes the Greens got in her seat back in 2022? 8.5%. Absolutely incredible. The people of North Sydney did not get what they were voting for. If the Body Snatchers replaced Kylie Tink with Adam Band, I'm not sure anybody would know the difference. The Teals, Liz, are basically Greens, but with more expensive lipstick.
100%. And I love that these guys still call themselves independent when their voting record shows, well, at least according to these numbers, they're voting as a bloc 75% of the time at least. So are you really independent? And, of course, siding with the Greens, which comes as no surprise because while they were quite an unknown quantity at the last election, which was their first election, we all knew that a large chunk of their funding was coming from Simon Holmes' Court's Climate 200. So these guys almost solely, no other issue, they were like single issue candidates. It was all about the climate. And it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how they go now that the climate politically has changed a lot and people are far more concerned about cost of living crisis, the cost of energy, things going forward, including education, you name it. The climate has taken a back seat as people have realised more and more over these last few years of the Albanese government just how much their attention to climate is hitting their hip pocket. And I feel that they're going to have just different priorities heading in to the election next year.
I've got a feeling that you might be right, Liz. And indeed, there is some interesting...
This is a rare day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm writing this in my diary when I get home. Joe Hildebrand agreed with me.
When it comes to sheer visceral loathing of both the Greens and the Teals, you and I are on a unity ticket. And there are a couple of funny things about this story and lots of fun little rabbit holes. You can, of course, get all the insights on the story
down
with
there,
Joe Hildebrand wherever you get your podcast. But firstly, there is no seat of North Sydney anymore. There is no North Sydney MP
redistribution.
Kylie Tink anymore because, of course, the Australian Electoral Commission has redistributed the boundaries and the seat simply disappears. And so that's all fine. That's all well and good. So
she's not going to run again, is she?
Whatever, that's right. So whatever outrageous sort of twist of fate was forced upon the good, peaceful burghers of North Sydney, that is going to be removed. So the Green they accidentally elected is no more. Now, a lot of people said, Kylie Tink, you should go and run in the seat of Bradfield, which is just next to North Sydney and where most of that electorate has gone to. And she has said no. She has said instead that she is going to back the candidate who lost in Bradfield last time, who is Daniela Boina, I think is her name, who set up a shadow electorate office with Simon Holmes' Court's backing. So she actually has effectively refused to concede the election result. She's got a bit Donald Trump. She goes, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere.
She lost, but she set up an electorate office.
She set up an electorate office.
As if she was the member.
Anyway, as if she was the member. But of course, she put shadow on the front of it as well. And so Kylie Ting has now said she's not going to run in North Sydney. She's going to fall on her sword and support Danielle Buena's campaign, which means that the Teals are punishing the person who won and rewarding the person who lost, which is strange, but things are only getting better because the 5 MPs that were mentioned in this story, the 5 Teal MPs, are only 5 of the 7 Teal MPs who, of course, occupy the House of Representatives. The other 2 are Allegra Spender in the seat of Wentworth and Kate Chaney in a seat in WA. I think it's called Curtin. And
yes,
those and Paul Fletcher, the member for Bradfield, who's just announced he's going to resign, which could pose a headache for Peter Dutton because they no longer have the incumbent advantage. But Paul Fletcher in September put out the same research of how these guys voted, right? And again, Allegra Spender and Kate Chaney were on the bottom. It's still the overwhelming majority of the time, but in the sort of mid to low 70s. Now, if you think about the things that Liz is talking about, how the world's kind of changed a little bit since 2022, the number one economic issue, cost of living, and the number one social issue, community disintegration and conflict over the war in the Middle East. So you have Allegra Spender, who is the Teal with probably the highest proportion of Jewish voters in her electorate. Yep. And then you have Kate Chaney, who is the only Teal in the most resource-dependent state in Australia. And what happens to all these high ideals? What happens to climate change being the most catastrophic, cataclysmic, world-ending event? Well, it seems just by a few percentage points to have dissipated because they don't seem to be finding as much common ground with the Greens. Allegra Spender, I'm pretty sure, is smart enough to know that any association that she has with the Greens, given their outrageous anti-Israel sentiment, given the fact that they have refused to condemn acts of vandalism at the Australian War Memorial, things like that, been equivocating on Israel. They have provided false equivalence between Israel and Hamas. We all know they're crazy candidates. So local government said the IDF was worse than ISIS. Ooh, worse. The IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, is worse than ISIS. Let's do some focus groups on how that goes down in Double Bay. Probably not too good, I would have thought. And again, Kate Chaney knows that in the middle of a cost of living, of course, she comes from one of the leafier, nice little seats in WA, but this is a state whose entire fortunes basically rest on the mining industry. And suddenly, when everything's going fine and everyone's rolling along, you can kind of sort of think, oh, well, maybe we should think about the climate. But suddenly when things get tough, maybe my constituents wouldn't be too happy.